This is how rulers rose, and how they fell. In the palace at Persepolis, under columns carved like bulls and lions, satraps from the far edges of the empire wait in a hall glowing with gold. From Lydia comes a man in embroidered robes heavy with coin. From Bactria another, smelling faintly of horses and steppe winds. From Egypt, an official bearing rolls of papyrus. All eyes fixed on the raised platform where the King of Kings sits beneath a canopy, silent but immense. A herald calls each name, and the satraps step forward to present tribute. Silver ingots, jars of wine, bolts of linen, even exotic animals brought from lands where the royal road vanishes into haze. The ritual is measured, precise, each bow calibrated, each gift weighed. Because this is not just a court pageant. It is a structure of empire laid bare. The satraps administer provinces as governors, but they do so only as long as they balance loyalty with autonomy, fear with gratitude. One satrap's hesitation, one whiff of rebellion, and the king's scribes and soldiers will descend like a storm. This scene captures the paradox of the Persian Empire. A system broad enough to stretch from the Aegean to the Indus, yet dependent on a fragile chain of men and oaths that could break with a whisper. The Persian Empire, born under Cyrus the Great in the mid-6th century BCE, did not emerge in a vacuum. The Medes and Babylonians had already shown how vast territories might be stitched together, but Cyrus transformed conquest into a durable system. He defeated the Medes, captured Babylon, and extended Persian power west to Lydia and east into Central Asia. What made his achievement different was not just the reach, but the method. He recognized that no king could personally govern an empire so vast, with dozens of languages and traditions. Instead, he delegated. He built a system of satrapies, each under a satrap who combined the duties of governor, tax collector, and military commander. These men were often Persians or Medes, sometimes local elites co-opted into service, but always balanced by royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king, who reported directly back to the court. This allowed Cyrus to be present everywhere in principle, even if his person was hundreds of miles away. It is an early case study in administrative decentralization. Too much freedom, and the empire fragments. Too much control, and resentment festers. If you want to help me translate more stories like this, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Cyrus also understood the psychology of empire. At Babylon, he famously allowed conquered peoples to maintain their temples and traditions. Jews exiled there were permitted to return and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. The message was subtle but powerful. Loyalty was secured not by erasing local identities, but by protecting them under the umbrella of Persian sovereignty. It was an innovation in soft power, an empire not of uniformity, but of tolerated difference, bound together by the authority of the King of Kings and the tribute system that fed his treasury. For ordinary subjects, this meant that their daily lives often continued much as before. But now their taxes and soldiers marched in the service of a larger entity. For the ruling elite, it meant balancing the benefits of imperial favor against the constant risk of suspicion. Under Darius the First, the empire's institutions reached their most elaborate form. Darius seized power after turmoil and rebellion, and he understood that the empire's size was both its strength and its vulnerability. He divided the empire into around 20 satrapies, each carefully assessed for tribute obligations, measured in talents of silver, horses, or even grain. He built the royal road, nearly 1,700 miles long, with relay stations that allowed messages to travel astonishing distances in days rather than weeks. Couriers carried orders and reports at a speed that impressed even Greek observers. Neither snow nor rain could stop them, a phrase that still echoes in modern postal mottos. This infrastructure was more than convenience. It was the nervous system of the empire, allowing the king to project authority across deserts and mountains. Darius also standardized coinage, introducing the gold daric and silver shekel, making taxation and trade easier to regulate. These measures show a key lesson. Empire survives when communication, currency, and accountability bind diverse regions into a single economic and administrative system. But no system is free of tension. Satraps were essential, yet they posed a perennial risk. How could the king ensure loyalty from men who commanded local armies and treasuries? The answer lay in overlapping controls. Each satrap shared power with a royal secretary and military officers who reported separately to the king. Inspectors toured provinces, hearing petitions from common subjects as well as from elites. The king himself made regular journeys, not only to awe with his presence, but to remind subjects of his ultimate authority. This web of oversight worked well under strong rulers, but under weaker ones, satraps often grew semi-independent, acting almost like kings in their own right. Here's the paradox. The system that allowed flexibility also contained the seeds of fragmentation. For a modern listener, the educational takeaway is clear. Decentralized power extends reach but requires continuous trust and vigilance, and trust is always vulnerable to personal ambition. The Persian elite culture reinforced this order. The King of Kings was not simply a monarch. He was a semi-sacred figure, chosen by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. The royal court ritualized this divine mandate. Audiences required precise etiquette, approaching the king prostrate, no matter one's rank. This theatrical distance elevated the king above satraps and generals, reminding them that their power was borrowed. Yet, in private, the king's reliance on them was immense. This mix of awe and dependence was sustainable only as long as victories came and tribute flowed. When defeats arrived, cracks widened quickly. Nowhere is this clearer than in the empire's confrontations with Greece. The Ionian revolt, sparked by Greek cities under Persian rule, forced Darius to send punitive expeditions. At Marathon, in 490 BCE, Persian forces were famously defeated, a shock to an empire accustomed to success. Xerxes, his son, sought to restore prestige with an immense invasion in 480 BCE. In the Great Council before his campaign, Persian nobles debated the risks, but Xerxes framed his plan as destiny. At Thermopylae, Persian forces eventually broke through, but at Salamis, their navy was destroyed. Here we see how centralized authority could turn strategy into personal pride. The king's decision, once made, carried immense weight, even if generals or satraps doubted its wisdom. The wars with Greece did not topple Persia, but they damaged its aura of invincibility and drained resources. The satraps still collected tribute. The royal road still hummed, but subjects saw that the King of Kings could bleed. Over time, internal strains deepened. The empire was vast, its subjects diverse, and succession disputes frequent. Unlike Rome's later system of clear imperial adoption, Persian succession often led to fraternal conflict and court intrigues. Each disputed throne meant satraps choosing sides, armies divided, and regions momentarily adrift. Some satraps even carved out their own spheres, leveraging distance from the capital to act as semi-sovereign rulers. The balance Cyrus and Darius had struck between central authority and local autonomy grew harder to maintain as later kings lacked the same vigor or legitimacy. When revolts flared in Egypt or Babylon, suppressing them drained attention and resources from frontier defense. It was a cycle. Rebellion encouraged further rebellion, as provinces sensed weakness at the core. Meanwhile, the culture of luxury at court became both a symbol of success and a target of critique. Greek writers painted Persian kings as decadent, reclining on couches of gold, drinking from jeweled cups. While exaggerated, such depictions contained kernels of truth. The immense wealth of empire could insulate rulers from the hardships of their subjects and distance them from the grit of administration. For a satrap managing border security or taxation, a king who seemed aloof risked losing credibility. Institutions can carry momentum, but over time, without strong personal leadership, their capacity to hold together a vast empire weakens. The final act came with Alexander of Macedon. By the late 4th century BCE, the Persian Empire remained formidable on paper. Vast satrapies, a treasury full of gold, a professional army with its famed immortals. But in practice, satraps bickered. Provinces had seen repeated revolts, and the court was riven by intrigue. When Alexander crossed into Asia, he faced not a monolith but a patchwork. At Issus and Gaugamela, the Persian armies were immense, but coordination faltered. And Darius III could not command the loyalty of all his satraps when it mattered most. As Alexander advanced, some governors surrendered their provinces, calculating that survival under the new conqueror was wiser than loyalty to a faltering king. The empire that had once stretched communication and control to unprecedented scales crumbled quickly once its central figure wavered. And yet, the Persian achievement was extraordinary. For over 2 centuries, they managed to govern the largest empire the world had yet seen, stretching from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. They pioneered systems of taxation, coinage, and provincial administration that influenced later empires, including Alexander's successors in Rome. They showed how an empire could incorporate multiple religions, languages, and legal systems without demanding uniformity. The concept of satrapy, a provincial governorship balancing local knowledge with imperial oversight, proved enduring, resurfacing in different guises for millennia. Even in collapse, Persia left tools that others would adapt and refine. The lesson to carry is simple, but powerful. The Persian Empire rose because its rulers combined conquest with organization. Satraps extended their reach, roads and couriers kept information flowing, tolerance built legitimacy, and the aura of the King of Kings bound the whole. It fell because those same strengths carried weaknesses. Satraps who could rebel. Roads that carried not just orders but rumors of weakness. Tolerance that turned to fragmentation when authority faltered. And kings whose divine aura evaporated when defeats mounted. Power at scale demands not only systems, but the continuous renewal of legitimacy. And that renewal depends as much on perception as on force. When subjects no longer believed the King of Kings could guarantee order and victory, the empire's spine gave way. The pillars of Persepolis still stand, silent and immense, but they remind us of an empire that once taught the world how to govern at scale, and of how even the greatest system bends when trust slips from the hands of its rulers.